Good evening, and welcome to the virtual premiere of Nightingale Vocal Ensemble's ADRIFT. My name is Nathan Halber. I was a composer and a performer for ADRIFT, as well as a member of the production team. ADRIFT is a choral opera featuring new music by a collaborative team of 5 Nightingale resident composers. ADRIFT tells the full life cycle of a love story through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. The music is exclusively a cappella, performed without any instruments, and this was a fully staged work of theater performed in the Black Box at the Boston Center for the Arts. The 16 performers in ADRIFT were tasked with fully creating this world, generating the entire soundscape, and embodying this seafaring story. I had the pleasure of working on ADRIFT from the very beginning with the show's creator and director, who I will soon turn this over to. But just to give a quick overview of the evening, the creator and director is going to give some remarks. We're going to watch the full show, which was performed live at the Boston Center for the Arts, which lasts about 45 minutes. And then we're going to have a sort of Q&A/reception among our creative team here of performers, composers, and other creative people who worked on the project. And we're just going to ask each other some questions and talk about the show a little bit. So without further ado, here is the creator and director of ADRIFT, Angela Yam.
Good evening, and welcome to the virtual premiere of Nightingale Vocal Ensemble's ADRIFT. My name is Angela Yam, and I produced, composed for, and directed ADRIFT. What you are about to see is a first-of-its-kind staged choral opera with words by queer New England poet Emily Dickinson. This piece features 10 entirely new musical settings by Nightingale resident composers, including Nicholas Ford, John Hookus, Nathan Halber, Benjamin Perry, and myself. This theatrical experience brings to life a carefully curated selection from Dickinson's nearly 2,000 poems. I wanted to say a huge thank you to artistic consultant Dr. Ivy Schweitzer for her valuable insight into Emily Dickinson's life and words. And we are thrilled to share this original choral opera with you all today. This piece is premiering during the conclusion of our fall fundraiser, which is raising $5,555 to celebrate our 5th year of adventurous and innovative programming like today's virtual premiere. At this moment, we have raised over 90% of our goal, and we would love to blast through that fundraiser goal during this broadcast. Please stay tuned at the end of the opera for a live Q&A talkback session with some of the performers and creatives of the work, hosted by composer and singer Nathan Halber. Because this broadcast is live, feel free to put any comments or questions in the live YouTube chat box at the side of your screen, and we will do our best to answer them at the end. And now, in the words of Dr. Ivy Schweitzer, let's be adrift in a sea of meaning. Let's be adrift in this great world where play and meaning and ecstasy and transport are available to us.
Just You said that I was great one day, then great it be if that please thee, or small, or any size at all. Nay, I'm the size should be tall, like the sand, like that, lower, lower, like the wren, or other heights of other ones I've seen. You said that I was great one day, great if that please thee, or small, or any size at all. Nay, I'm the size you be. It's all you guess. And I must be rhinoceros, or mouse. At once, for you said that I was great someday, then great be if that please thee, or small, or any size at all. Nay, I'm the size of thee, so say, if queen it be, or page, please thee. I'm that, or other things, if other things there be, with justice stimulus, I salute thee. Let me grow. Then you will be a sea. Then you will be a sea. I want to grow. Come now, let me grow. Let me grow. Let me The sea said, go. The sea said, go. The sea said, "'Tis customary as we part, a trinket to confer. It helps to stimulate the faith when lovers be afar. 'Tis customary as we part, a trinket to confer. It helps to stimulate the faith when lovers be afar. 'Tis various as the various taste, a trinket to confer. Various as the various taste, and we should converse. Various as the various taste, and we should converse. Various as the various taste. Clematis, journeying far. Clematis, with a single flare, presents me
Okay, thank you all so much for watching, and welcome to the post-show reception and Q&A. Um, we've got some of our team here. We've got singers. We had a composer. We've definitely got singers. We've got the director, the assistant director slash lighting artist. So many things represented here. So let's just get into like talking about what we just experienced, and what we all experienced back in March as well. So just to kick things off, I had a question for Angela, which is that um, these are just 10, the text of this choral opera are just 10 distinct poems by Emily Dickinson. And the story that we have crafted here emerges from putting these 10 poems next to each other in a specifically chosen order, and a story is suggested by juxtaposing these texts. I'm curious, how did you think about, or what was your approach to staging this kind of very like abstract sort of story and actually making that a physical reality?
Yeah, I would love to speak about that. One of the inspirations that I took from in curating these 10 poems next to each other is actually how a lot of art song cycles are composed in classical music, with disparate poems by the same poet or different poets, but in a composer putting them next to each other, curating this like museum-like experience of disparate paintings, but being in the same room or in the same gallery, telling a story together. And so in curating these 10 poems, which you and I read through all, what is it, 1800 and something of Emily Dickinson's poetry. It took us a few days. We looked at ones that we thought were viscerally musically evocative, and stitched them slowly together in collaboration with the 5 composers. And that's how these 10 came to be in this order as well. In staging something like this, I was also drawn to how art songs, when they're stitched together in a cycle, are naturally connected by an audience or by a listener due to the passage of time. That's something that we as live musicians especially sort of specialize in. Our way of painting is painting across time. And so as humans experience stories through chronological order, my goal was in creating a narrative that would be stitched together with the aid of the audience as well. And so in staging these pieces, I really wanted to look into our original plan for the timeline and chronology of this story, as well as influenced by the music that the composers wrote. I also knew that I wanted to give the performers who were doing all of this a cappella, no pitching, just no tuning forks, just each other and each other's sense of pitch. I wanted to give them the most chance of not only success like notes and rhythm, but also musically and artistically to be able to convey the story. Thank you for your question.
Nice. Thank you for answering that. One thing about this choral opera that we all created together is that it's yes, it's a love story, but there's this extra like thematic through line of the sea. And we start adrift, a little boat adrift, and through the majority of the poems in this cycle, if you will, we explore love in its various forms and various stages, sort of juxtaposed against the image of the sea and being at sea, or being in port, heart in port, or various ideas like that. And one of our ideas that you came up with in the first movement was this idea of building the boat. We have this moment at the end of the first movement where we all join together as this full ensemble of 16 as like the boat, the proverbial boat of our story. Following that, in the second movement, we have some more chamber boat action. um, with On This Wondrous Sea. And Juan and Nick, I especially enjoyed getting to embody a boat with the two of you. And I was curious if the two of you could comment on that experience at all. It was an interesting challenge, but a fun one to sort of find our dynamic together, like both music and from a staging point of view. And I'm just curious what that was like for both of you.
Yeah, so I think so much of this performance was so movement based. You know, a lot of the movements really echoed what the music was doing. And so having this image of, you know, like creating a boat with just us, you know, no props, I think it really also helped me dig into the music too and just really understand kind of what the composer. We were so lucky, you know, Ben composed that particular piece. We were so lucky to have Ben there because I feel like, you know, having the composer there with us provided such an interesting perspective, as well as a lot of these movements kind of reflecting, you know, what the music was doing. So I thought we were just physicalizing what we were hearing and singing, and it was really powerful in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think on that note, you know, physicalizing it helped. You just mentioned Angela, you know, the fact that we had no help in any way when we were on the stage. And so, yeah, I think physicalizing it made it more tangible for us. It gave us something to hold on to, and it gave us, you know, something thematically to hold on to as well. You know, there is a, you know, abstract takeaway from Adrift. I think it can have many takeaways, like depending, you know, which time are you seeing it. It's abstract in that way, and I think, you know, the physicalizations for the performers brought it together in a way that you know, made it strong, just like a show that has a proper plot. You know, this happens, then this happens, and we can like act all of that out. Well, we didn't. It was more abstractions in Adrift, and so like when we emboldened and like embodied these boats, like our boat of three, and then there was the other boat of three, and then we were surrounded by buoys just like in the water. I don't know, it was enough to hold, it was something to hold on to enough that I think gave for an entertaining scene. So yeah.
Nice. Thank you all so much for sharing about that. Oh dear. And actually, to what you just said about how we had no help out there, in a way, I hadn't thought about this, but it's just a fun turn of phrase, right? But like we were sort of adrift out there. We were like out at sea, just sort of fending for ourselves on the high seas. But it was fun. I wanted to talk with Bobby. You had like prominent solo roles in a few of these pieces toward the end of Adrift, and I wanted to pick your brain about that experience. I guess I'll start with "'Twas My One Glory," which is the first of the two in that set, and it's like a really like watching you perform that solo is really powerful and amazing, and it's a like a really emotionally impactful experience seeing you do that. And I'm curious if you could share any insights at all that you have about like what it's like to perform that, or if there's anything you're thinking about, or like if you have any opinions about the music or the text or anything like that.
Yeah, so I love the text. It was pretty easy to dig into. I think for most of us, we've experienced either looking forward to a time when we are expiring and just being grateful for the love that we've experienced in our lives, or previous loves that we've experienced, and how that still touches us. And I mean, even now I'm like, oh, it's a little clumped. It's powerful. I mean, Emily wrote some amazing words, and I think, you know, she obviously had a lot of feelings about that. So that was very easy to dig into. And then Nathan, you wrote, you know, gorgeous music that, and you didn't explicitly write it for me, but it felt very easy in my voice, because it explored so much of my range in a very comfortable way. So that made it really easy for me to like to dig into the text and to feel that. And looking ahead, like having someone to direct that at, like having Judah come into the picture and knowing that Judah was going to come into the picture, it gave me a little bit of foresight that the audience didn't necessarily know about, but I knew about. And so I knew that I was going to have, in my little like mental story, I had this, chance to sort of send it out, and then that I was going to say goodbye. Right. Um, and then to have everybody else behind all of that and have it allow myself to disappear into the texture of like everybody, like I was saying in the beginning, like that everybody has had this experience of being loved, whether it's by your parents or a pet or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a person, a significant other person in your life, that we all get to kind of be there together, and then we swim in this sort of improvisational soup together of those things, and then kind of emerge. I don't know, I just felt very human. So it was really easy to dig into. And I also had a friend in the audience who was going through something very personal, and that made it pretty easy to dig into as well.
Nice, thank you. And I guess while we're there, I'd love to pick your brain about singing "She Died" as well, which is the one that follows "'Twas My One Glory." And this is music composed by Angela. And actually, I'd love, Angela, if you want to like hop in and weigh in on this movement at all as well, feel free. I love it. It's like this musical and textual and then musical expression of like this soul, like that's being torn apart. And we explore that with John's piece actually at the end, "A Poor Torn Heart." But you, Bobby, you achieved this really great like sonic and at least apparently emotional connection with Judah in performing that. And I was curious what it was like to discover that together and to like find that sound and that feeling of being sort of on the same frequency.
Yeah, I mean, Judah and I have performed together a lot. And we both come from an early music and specifically chanty background. And we both have a lot of range in the early and contemporary, and also have done a lot of contemporary music, um, and our voices, I feel, are very well matched. So we were able to kind of lean on that a little bit, which was nice. I mean, it's always nice, right? Like any kind of instrumentalist, whether it's a continuo player or a guitarist or a saxophonist or whatever that you just really like performing with. Like it's always great to like dig into those relationships. And Angela, the way you set the text really allowed for us to kind of rest. Not rest is the wrong word. I think it's a foundation upon which we were able to build. And yeah, I think there was, but then to expand upon our sort of chanty early music background and then take it into this contemporary, not multiphonics, what's the word I'm looking for? The extended techniques that we were able to dig into. I mean, just touch on some of our extended techniques. And it was really nice to have someone to play off of that with. And I think having the person there in front of you, and especially like the way that Angie, where you lit it with Judah, you can't see his face, and so then all you see is my profile, and it's kind of weird the way it almost looks like our bodies complete each other, and it's super cool. And so the staging and the lighting is great. And yeah, it lets all of that synergy happen together, and it just becomes its own thing in that moment. So kudos to all, because I don't think any one piece stands on its own.
Yeah, I agree. Angela, how were you thinking about that poem, and what informed your compositional choices with that?
Yeah, I think Bobby summed it up really in the exact same way that I was thinking of it. I got some questions about how I set this poem or why I said it in this way in the past, and I'll just bring up the theme of the piece, which is being at peace with being adrift, with ambiguity, allows for an interpretation of this poem that can mean many things. It can mean it's a disjoining of two entities. If those two entities are two lovers, that's totally appropriate. If those two entities are the body and the soul, that's totally appropriate. And the way that I said it, having these two treble voices in unison and playing with each other, I wanted to convey that togetherness of this, let's say, for the purpose of this metaphor, of the soul and the body, as one being. And then they are in homophony for much of it. And at particular moments, they split. And there's a call at the end to me. And in the staging, I reflected this by having the two singers physically move away from each other, of calling out to each other again, and not being able to find each other. But yeah, beautifully done.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Angela. And to Bobby's point, I thought both in 'Twas and She Died were some of the most like exciting lighting moments in the show, like really, really spectacular stuff that emphasized what was happening musically, calling attention to like musical details actually, which was really great, and emphasizing Angela's staging. So I'm curious, Angie, in your what I would say was a very successful debut as a lighting board operator, can you weigh in on that at all, and like what that was like, and what kinds of things you were thinking about as you were doing that?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely, there was a little bit of fear at the beginning. I'm not gonna lie. Just having, never been behind a lighting board before, and but feeling support from everyone else. I think, especially, I know Angela and I had went over lighting for about half of the show, and then the first run through, I opened my score, I get to a certain point, and I'm like, oh, I have no more notes. It looks like we're gonna spontaneously create some stuff here. And I think what I tried to do in creating these moments, particularly in those two movements, is to complement the singer's movements, and as someone who has experience on stage as a singer, to try and anticipate where they wanted to move, where the lighting would balance not only a reflection of their movements, but a reflection of musically what's happening. In 'Twas My One Glory, I wanted to make sure that the most climactic moment had that bright, intense light, and then to contrast with coming back down into She Died. I think that things like that, it was very intuitive, but also it's so interesting watching it back. I'm in the lighting box thinking so hard about doing these things, and seeing it from such a small screen in the lighting booth from the stage, and then seeing it like without the camera angles and everything. It kind of plays off of I believe what Bobby was saying, like depends on where you're seeing it, or maybe it was Nick that said like how you're seeing it, or where, like every position in the audience had a different perspective of the lighting, the sound, the movement. And I'm really proud to have complemented all of that in what initially felt like a scramble, but then the more times we ran through the show, I was like getting a little bit more confident. I was like, ooh, what if I added this, or what if I, it was really fun to feel like I was contributing in a creative way that was completely new, but worked well. So I was very proud of that, and proud of everyone for doing this. It was really a pleasure.
Nice. And actually, yeah, it's interesting to think about the fact that like all of those lighting moves you were making, you had one very specific kind of limited perspective from your lighting booth, and actually none of the shots, none of the camera angles shown in this production are what you were seeing. They're all from not like just straight on as you were seeing the show, which I think is just really interesting. And it kind of maybe captures a little bit, like you were saying, actually, of how the audience might have experienced it from their different points of view. There is one specific moment that I just want to hype, which is in 'Twas My One Glory, this piece I composed, and it's when the tutti, soprano, and altos enter. You did this like light up action, and it's like it captures exactly in luminous form what I felt the music was doing at that moment. So thank you. That's pretty sick. Yeah, and so okay, so we've been focusing a lot on the end of the show, and so why not continue to do so? So movement 8 is "'Twas My One Glory." Movement 9 is "She Died," and then movement 10 is "A Poor Torn Heart." So after Angela has ripped apart this soul, John, your task was to comment on that in some sense, with this really uh, interesting and challenging poem of "A Poor Torn Heart, a Tattered Heart." And I have to say, when we first got your score, I was like a little confused. Actually, it was so different from the way that I had like thought about the poem. It was this completely like different take on the poem than I had originally imagined when I read it. But I love it. It's one of my favorite like movements in the show, and I'm just curious, like, what were you thinking? Like, where did the idea, the concept for that setting come from?
Well, the first thing I have to say is I'm glad I didn't hear "She Died" before I started writing it, because I would have been panicking about making that transition, because wow, leading up after that. Like, how do you even begin?
Yeah.
But but yeah, I mean, a lot of what I focused on was groove. The thing that really holds it together is that 7/4 rhythm. So I was like, we have to contrast the opening section of the poem, where the speaker is feeling that grief, they're feeling that poor torn heart, and the ending section where we're seeing compassion, kindness, more than relief, moving on to something else. So I managed to find a groove that was able to fit both of those styles pretty well, just with a slight tempo change with an intention change, so that it wasn't just completely disparate sections out of nowhere. Um, and really, after that, you just play with genre. You give a sense of tattering to a tattered heart. Um, I particularly loved playing with that section, "Nor noticed night did soft descend, nor constellation burned," because there's so much energy in that. You're noticing all of these different things. Finally, the speaker's really taking in their surroundings for the first time. And so I had to break up some of that rhythm just a little bit. I had to let the rhythm just get a little bit more speech like, so that we could slowly transition down to process the grief of losing something, to process the heartbreak, to process the self being destroyed. That could lead into their "Sandals for the Barefoot," where we could just have this warmth, this kindness. I immediately was like, bossa nova. If there is one genre of music that makes you feel warm and like you're getting a hug, it is bossa nova. So I was lucky that I had a very talented soloist who could handle that and who was wildly good at it. Yes. Which then allowed us to just drift off into that night.
Nice. Yeah, Chihiro was amazing in that. And I think Angela, you had actually heard Chihiro do some jazzy stuff, um, right? That like you had heard something.
My it was interesting being on like the casting side of things. As a singer, it's something that it's very nebulous and like unusual, and I don't know, what factors go into it. But really, I just like Googled people, and I I found on Chihiro's Facebook like her singing like a jazzy Christmas carol or something, and I was like, perfect, that's the soloist. So you never know, if you have like an old video of you singing on Facebook, it might influence your casting.
Right. Yeah, we got this composition by John, and it was like, oh yeah, that's Chihiro, I guess. Yeah, and that worked out amazingly. And somewhat coincidentally, Chihiro was basically the featured soloist on two of your compositions, John, on "A Poor Torn Heart," but also on "The Sea Said Come." She's sort of like the embodiment of the sea as this sort of like imperious, domineering, perhaps abusive person in our imagined protagonist's life. And that piece I really love as well. And speaking of how "A Poor Torn Heart" was its own kind of transition, taking us from this tattered heart to "Sandals for the Barefoot," I feel like you also had a significant transitional task with "The Sea Said Come," and that's, to me, that's like the hinge of the entire show. And like it's terrifying. Actually, I find that music really scary in a perfect way, though. And it sort of takes us into like the dark, um, more like uh, sad and grieving, pained part of this relationship. And yeah, I don't exactly have a question, but I really love your setting of that piece. It's really cool. So thanks for doing that. Yeah, I guess I'm curious, real quick, if you do have any thoughts about that piece, about the sea said come, and sort of like that's a challenging text as well, where there's this like this dialogue happening between the sea and the brook, and then the brook becomes a sea, and all this stuff. So what were you thinking about there?
Well, to be quite frank, the moment I saw anything resembling dialogue, I was like, okay, this is a scene. You know, scene work is very much my wheelhouse in music. I love writing anything involving scene work or acting. So I managed to just separate the characters and kind of let them do their thing. Yeah, I absolutely thought of the sea in that poem as an abuser in a relationship. It's so the repetition of the word come, not just in my setting, but also just in the poem itself. It's everywhere. It's so emphatic over and over and over. Come, 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 come. It has this feeling of like someone trying to control or possess someone else more than just demand of them, which is why you get that ending sequence where the brook finally says, let me go, and finally is able to sort of break out of that consistent mentality in musical terms, you know, break out of that repetitive come, come, and finally sort of forge their own identity.
Nice. Yeah, it was. I love the way you executed that. Nick, I'm wondering if you can comment on some of your movement in. You said that I was great. I feel like you brought an athleticism to it.
Lord.
That added a lot. Great dimension.
Well, that was a facet of Angela's direction. I will just say, that was one aspect of Adrift that I especially enjoyed as a performer. You know, it felt, you know, we were just using techniques that I think many of us have like experienced along, like within our training at some point. You know, where you're just kind of, we use them in the formation of like some of the blockings where, you know, we're just thinking abstractly of like how does this scene uh, become basically. And yeah, I'm trying to remember in your piece, Nathan, what exact, I mean, we were going for like the boys group, and then like it was just kind of like wooing the crowd. And I don't know, we just got these like random little directives where we're like, okay, now we're gonna be a rhinoceros and then mice. And I'm like, we at first we're all just kind of like meandering around. So it's like, okay, well, I guess I'm just gonna do this really dramatically, and then it will at least be of interest. And I think in the end, you know, we all kind of like met each other, and yeah, I think that's like the some of the magic in Adrift is it can be whatever. Like the stage direction could be many things, and you know, if you don't like what we did in that piece or any piece, like you could change it to look very different. And I think that's great. I think it was extremely fun. It showed us, you know, many strengths and just where are our ceilings as performers for various multitaskings. You know, we were singing completely unaccompanied, crazy harmonies at times, especially in yours, Nathan. Like, where is the pitch? And I mean, we held it together, and all while sometimes, you know, running around like like very much trying to make sure you are not out of breath to stay in tune and everything. So like it was a huge challenge, but in the end, yeah, I think the athleticism I was bringing was like some of the most fun. It was one of the most fun aspects of Adrift for me.
Nice. And speaking of some of the strange harmonies, another composer in this show who didn't shy away from that was Nicholas Ford. and he never shies away from that. I'm curious. So, Nick, you sang one of his compositions in this, which is "Split the Lark," and that's like probably the most like romantic, but in both senses, movement of this piece. And it's got this like amazing soloistic writing. Like to me, it feels like string quartet writing, and it is a quartet, in fact, an SATB quartet. I'm curious what singing that was like, and sort of having this opportunity to be more of a chamber musician. In a true sense, than almost anywhere else in this show.
Yeah, I think going right off of what I previously responded to, that is another aspect of Adrift that gives you another opportunity as a performer to either, if you want to look at it in by way of like you have a soloistic moment, or you have a moment where just the musical texture is completely different. Like you're not creating an ambiance that is like literal like ambient sounds. Like you said, it was very it was like it was a quartet, but yes, the lines were much more, I don't know if virtuosic isn't really the word, but they were more beautiful lines on their own. And so the way that they went together, I think we all felt like you can sing out in a way that you do when you're being a chamber musician in that respect, versus like sometimes where you're making pad type of sounds, like sustains, drones, like whatever it may be. So yeah, in pieces like Split the Lark, it was immensely gratifying in a completely different way than being able to feel in my body and run around and do all these things that we honestly don't get to do often as vocalists. Like even if you're on a stage, like in a production, like anything that's at least semi-staged, it's a different form of expression. And I thoroughly enjoyed the more abstract physicalization that Adrift facilitates. And then the only bad thing about Split the Lark was that I had to do it right after running around being the C for like 4 minutes, and I wasn't singing during that piece, but I was like, at the same time, because I wasn't singing, I was like, okay, well, I can just go hard then. And I'm like doing all this stuff to be the C. And then, just because I wanted to give it all, there I found myself like suddenly the music stops and the C resides, and suddenly we're just like suspended in time, like singing this very horizontal, like very pure. It starts very like suspended, and gains some traction and more interest in that way. But yeah, I think all in all, Split the Lark and other compositions within it that were more chambery than the whole ensemble were another great fun like experience of this production.
Nice. Thank you. Angela, would you like to give a 15-second wrap up?
Thank you all so much for coming. Check out our website. Come to us, see us in person. Ask us all of your questions before we get booted by our Zoom. We love this piece. It has a great future. We brought it to the Emily Dickinson International Society, and we have plans to bring it again in a future Nightingale season.